We had Justin Jefferson on this program just yesterday, asked him if he was surprised about Kirk Cousins leaving. He said yes and no. And how the no was sort of he expanded on the business relationship that obviously Kirk and the Vikings were going through in relation to knowing that Jefferson had to be signed, and the yes he didn't really expand on, which is like, I'm Justin Jefferson. Why would you leave me if you're a quarterback? So that now leaves the question of Sam Darnold and J.J. McCarthy. What's your best guess on how the Vikings ship navigates those waters this fall, Albert?
I think they think higher of Sam Darnold than a lot of people do. And I think, all due respect to your Jets fandom, I do think that I think the Vikings feel like he is a distressed asset and a guy who wasn't properly raised in the league and dealt with a lot of rocky waters. And I guess there's almost like a Geno Smith quality to it too, where it's like, man, this guy's had a chance now to take a minute and learn from his mistakes. And I think I would implore anybody who's listening to this to go back and watch the fourth quarter of the Niners-Ravens Christmas night game, because that game was a blowout. Right? The Ravens won going away. But I remember watching the end of that game, and Sam Darnold played about the last 10 minutes. And seeing him in the context of having those players around him and those coaches around him and playing for Kyle Shanahan, I remember thinking to myself, this guy's playing faster. This looks like a different player. And I've talked to Kevin O'Connell about that, and he said they saw the same thing. And Sam had a really strong spring. So what does that do to J.J. McCarthy? I think it enables them to be patient when they need to be patient with J.J. McCarthy. And I know Kevin's been very detailed about putting together a tiered, you have to hit these markers before we're going to put you on the field. And a lot of coaches say that, you know what I mean, with first-round quarterbacks, but they don't really do it. And it can be to the detriment of a quarterback that they get pushed out there because it's well, what the hell, just play him, I think the better Sam plays, the better situation becomes for J.J. McCarthy, within reason, where if they think they can win with Sam Darnold, and I believe right now they think they can win with Sam Darnold, and Sam Darnold's going to get the first snap in training camp, that's going to enable Kevin to enact the entire plan that he has for J.J. McCarthy, where J.J. is going to have to hit these detailed markers along the way before they think about putting him out on the field. I'm not saying this is Aaron Rodgers, Jordan Love. Obviously, that's different. But I do think that the way Sam Darnold looked at the end of last year, and then the way he's looked in the spring has at least created some flexibility for the Vikings and how they handle J.J. McCarthy, which, again, I think long-term winds up being a best of both worlds situation.
Yeah, it's Baker Mayfield is the analogy that I keep landing on here. And it's not apples to apples, because you could say also Alex Smith, right? Which would mean J.J. McCarthy's in the Mahomes position, and that's a very unfair comparison to make. But Baker was drafted 2 spots ahead of Sam. Baker did win a playoff game, did make a playoffs that Sam has not had. Baker did have a cup of coffee in the NFC West before winding up in his new spot that I think a lot of people thought really gave him the fuel to rise in Tampa last year. Maybe that cup of coffee in San Francisco for Darnold is the same situation in Minnesota, which has the weaponry similar to, one would say, Tampa had, ready for Baker. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And it's kind of right there. Canales helping out Baker. Kevin O'Connell might be the right sauce for Sam after he had his Shanahan time, after Baker had his McVay time. I don't know. That's the analogy I keep landing on here for this.
I mean, and how many of these guys, I remember having this conversation with a Seahawks coach, to go back to Geno, when we were walking off the field at training camp, and this guy I've known for a while, and he said to me, he's like, being around Geno makes me wonder how many more guys there are like this, that have talent, that were just mismanaged when they were young, that went through coaching changes, that had to switch teams, that had everything turned upside down, and then they got some time to sit and wait. And then they got in the right situation, and all of a sudden it was the reason he was drafted so high in the first place was legitimate. It was just he wasn't in the right situation. there are very few young quarterbacks that I believe can overcome bad circumstances. And, we can talk about Mahomes all we want. He had a great circumstance. We can talk about Lamar, like Josh Allen. Those guys walked into awesome situations, right? Like those guys were all in great situations. How many quarterbacks have legitimately been able to overcome bad situations as young players? You can't find them. Now, that doesn't mean Mahomes wouldn't have done it. That doesn't mean that Lamar wouldn't have done it or Josh wouldn't have done it. They weren't asked to do it, right? Like they walked into really great situations that helped them grow. And Andrew Luck is the only one I can look at and say, yeah, that guy had a shaky situation, and he still wound up being a playoff quarterback early in his career. It's just so rare that like 100%. Like I think you could look at somebody like Sam and say, here's a kid who's pretty smart, who came out, who was more raw as a player than people wanted to admit, who probably went to the wrong system, went and played in like a Peyton Manning system, which was not quite right for him. And I remember hearing people back then, like, this guy would be good for a Shanahan system. Then he gets in one, and all of a sudden he looks really good, right? I think you can put the pieces together and see where this could be a very real new beginning for Sam Darnold, whether that means he's in Minnesota for a few years, or, maybe, like you said, you bring up the Alex Smith, Patrick Mahomes situation. Like maybe this becomes a great problem to have, where both guys have a great year. Sam Darnold on the field, JJ McCarthy in the background, and Sam winds up somewhere else in 2025 as a starter, and JJ's ready to go, having a full year of learning under his belt into next year as well.
Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.